I really must ask about the weekend speculation of Treasury Secretary Yellen. If we were to get a Biden administration, would you be willing to serve for a President Biden?
I appreciate your asking and the notion that it's a job I can do, but I really have no comment on that. I'm sorry.
Well, that would be good. And we, of course, knew that would be the gracious answer from Janet Yellen. Chair Yellen, away from the monetary discussion, and maybe we'll touch on that a bit here, we must speak about this important research. You were steeped in this. Long ago and far away, a Nobel laureate introduced us to auction theory, speaking about Richard Scarry in children's books at a Nobel Prize speech in Stockholm. This is long ago and far away.
You're very right. That was my spouse who won the Nobel Prize and discussed the relevance of Richard Scarry to his work.
Mr. Akerlof's wonderful speech there, that really advent with Stiglitz of what we're talking about here. Wilson and Milgram, they're at a small school across the pond, Chair Yellen.
Yes,
just took the trophy as well. Can auction theory help us solve climate change by fixing carbon pricing? I see no evidence that it can do it. Can we actually get to a legitimate, workable auction market for climate change through carbon pricing?
Well, let me say, referring to the Group of 30 report that we just put out, we urge governments to take the steps that are necessary to get a transition to net zero, and carbon pricing is central to that. So we strongly believe that every government should price emissions. And while that's not the only policy that's necessary, that is a critical tool to create the right incentives for a transition to net zero. There are different ways of doing it. You said auction theory. So one way to do this is to limit emissions by requiring permits to emit greenhouse gases, and they would create a market in which they would be priced. It's possible to auction the permits if the permits are auctioned. I'm not aware of any country that's doing that now, but that would generate revenue that could be used for many different purposes, including compensating low-income people. But a more straightforward way to do this, and it's what I would recommend for the United States, that hopefully we will, in the years ahead, go in this direction, is simply to put in place a carbon tax. A very efficient way to price carbon would be to go to the mine head, the well, where energy that creates carbon emissions enters the economy, and to simply levy a tax. So I think that's an easier and more efficient way than auctioning permits, but one way or another, we think carbon pricing is important.
With your report with Governor Carney, and with all of the efforts, Jacob Frenkel and all of the Group of 30, if we say that auction pricing has failed, where is the evidence that these societies will do a carbon tax? Are you optimistic we can get a carbon tax initiated country to country?
Well, different countries have taken different approaches, and what we're looking for is carbon pricing. For the United States that doesn't have this in place, I would, and other countries that have not started going down this route, I think a carbon tax is a reasonable way to go. But auctioning off permits or simply putting in place a system where there needs to be a permit to emit, that's an approach that we see in many European countries, and we're not criticizing that as an alternative.
Chair Yellen, as I was reading this report, I was struck by the firepower of the people who co-authored this. It's who's who in central banking weighing in on important policy. And I know you've been called on to weigh in on other important policy in the United States. In August, it was reported that you'd had conversations with the Biden-Harris camp about how to fix the economy going forward. Can you share anything from what you think we should do to get the economy back on track from here?
Right. Well, let me say that I did meet with Biden and Harris and brief them about financial sector issues, but I'm not working with the campaign. But you asked me what I think we need to do to get the economy back on track. So I would say what heads my list is dealing more effectively with the pandemic, with the health-related issues, getting the infection level under control through contact tracing, testing, isolation of people who have it. I think we need a much more effective effort than we've had. And if we have that, it'll be good not only for health, but for being able to open up the economy. And we've seen that in countries ranging from Germany to Korea to China that have been successful. And then we need support for the economy, both for monetary and fiscal policy. And monetary policy has already done a huge amount. Fiscal policy response in the United States has been extremely impressive, but actually it's much larger, the fiscal support, than what was done after the 2008-9 financial crisis. But the fiscal support has now lapsed. And so far, spending has held up. Unemployed workers who got that extra $600 a week through the end of July, they use that to stay current on their bills, to support their spending. They even stash some of it away so that they've been able to get through this last couple of months and pay their bills. Yeah. But it's running out, and I think we need to do that. And state and local governments also face huge budget shortfalls. I'm working on a task force with the governor of California to address the pandemic. They face a $54 billion shortfall this year. I think that's very important, too.
So in the meantime, Steve Rasciuto of Mizuho just was on, and he said that if Congress were to pass a $2 trillion fiscal support plan, that he expects the Federal Reserve to potentially buy up all of that in order to help things along. Do you think that that's an advisable step?
So the Federal Reserve's asset purchases, they've not made clear their plans going forward, and I'm expecting them to offer more guidance. But their objective there is going to be to try to keep both long and short interest rates at low levels to support an economic recovery. It is not their objective ever to directly try to help the federal government finance its budget deficit, and that would be a very dangerous kind of support to provide. But I do expect, I think asset purchases have worked. They're holding down longer term rates, and I expect there to be ongoing purchases, but probably not geared to the federal deficit.
Chair Yellen, we are rebuilding our institutions out of this natural disaster. I want to go back to James Tobin a few years ago, who you took your PhD with, where he introduced with Nordhaus the measure of our welfare system, just simply thinking about the welfare state within a capitalistic market. We now come up to where we are now with this historic election, and we've got the Democrats trying to get back to some form of social construct, and Mr. Trump and others with a Lockean individualistic nature as well. How do you perceive how we move forward with our new capitalism, our new welfare state, given the fiscal deficits, given the trade deficit where it is, and given a monetary theory that seems to be extended and exhausted. What does the new system look like for you in the next few years?
So that's a very hard and comprehensive question, but I would say that I think fiscal policy needs to play an active role. Once upon a time, starting in the 1980s, there was a view that the Fed can handle the job of keeping the economy operating at full employment, and fiscal policy should focus on allocative issues. And now we're faced with a world characterized by secular stagnation. There is a surfeit, too much saving in the global economy, especially among developed countries, and weak investment demand. And it's been pushing down real rates of interest and depriving monetary policy of a lot of the ability it had to address economic weakness. And I would never have imagined when the 2008 crisis hit that short rates would stay at zero for 7 full years. And here we are back again with zero short rates. And of course, there are unconventional tools, asset purchases, forward guidance that expand what monetary policy can do. But there are some limits. And it's important for fiscal policy to fill in that gap. And I believe while the pandemic is still seriously affecting the economy, we need to continue extraordinary fiscal support. But even beyond that, I think it will be necessary. But a good side of low interest rates is that it reduces the interest burden of the debt. And I think it makes it possible, and it's not a short-run phenomenon, short rates. It's something that's going to probably be with us for many years to come, and we can afford to have more debt than we used to think was sustainable.